Hadley, what's going on in Israel?
Well, Steve, this is the latest move by the Prime Minister that has driven Israelis to the streets. What we saw over the weekend was essentially the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant getting sacked by the Prime Minister. That's because he pushed back on Mr. Netanyahu's planned reforms to the judiciary. Now, just remember that over the last 4 months, we have seen hundreds of thousands of Israelis taking to the street in protest of this very issue. These planned judicial reforms would essentially give the current government control over the appointment of judges. They'd also have control, essentially, over Supreme Court decisions, whether or not they would follow through with them or perhaps strike them down. And a lot of folks really looking at this as just another way for the government, for the Prime Minister himself, to gain more power here, because it would essentially make it much more difficult to call the leadership unfit. Now, one of the things that we've seen Mr. Netanyahu able to do over the last several decades is find a way to maintain power. The last time he came into office, he cobbled together a coalition of very right-wing and extreme conservatives, and that has given cause for pause for those sitting in Washington as well as European capitals. But it's also given folks out here in the UAE and others a raised eyebrow, if you will. Remember, of course, that Mr. Netanyahu was behind the Israeli side of things when we talked about the Abraham Accords just a couple of years ago. And what we've seen over the last several months is Mr. Netanyahu has been quite busy at home, not just with protests, but also with moves, frankly, to change some other things within his government, is a hands-off approach to the Abraham Accords themselves. You'll remember that there was a bilateral trade agreement signed a few years ago with the UAE specifically, saying that they wanted to reach some $10 billion of cross-investment in the next few years. And right now that number is sitting just at 2. So there are questions and concerns about how this could impact the Abraham Accords, but also how this could impact the ability of Israel to sign an agreement and a relationship and diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia. And as you know, I speak with Saudi officials quite often. It's been essentially a message of it's just a question of when that could actually happen. However, certainly what we've seen from Mr. Netanyahu over the last several months does raise questions about whether or not we're going to end up seeing that kind of an agreement, guys.